Figure 2.2 shows the results when the health of the relatives was varied. Although sick relatives received more everyday helping than healthy ones, they received less life or death help than healthy ones. According to the theory of kin selection, this is because the reproductive value of sick relatives is less than that of healthy ones. They are less likely to have children, and therefore there is less evolutionary benefit in terms of inclusive fitness for the helper. Thus, in this simulation, participants helped their kin in a manner that maximized their own inclusive fitness. Wang 2002 reported a similar set of findings. Figure 2.2. People are more likely to help relatives with life or death helping when they are within the age range for producing children. Bernstein, Crandall, and Kitayama, 1994. On the x-axis is help in the categories of sick relatives or healthy relatives, and on the y-axis is tendency to help from 0 to 2.0. So you can see that the tendency to help sick relatives is about 0.8, and the tendency to help healthy relatives is about 1.3, which is a substantial difference. And in terms of everyday helping, with sick relatives, the tendency to help is 2.0, which is quite high, and the tendency to help healthy relatives with everyday helping is about 0.5, which makes sense because healthy relatives don't need everyday helping. But when it comes to life or death helping, you're more likely to help healthy relatives than sick relatives. Others have tested the theory of kin selection in another way by looking at how grandparents treated their grandchildren. Grandmothers and grandfathers differ in parental certainty, that is, the confidence they have that a child or a grandchild is actually related to them. A grandmother knows for certain whether or not she gave birth to her children, and thus knows for sure that someone she believes is her biological child actually is related to her. If she has a daughter, she is also certain that the daughter's children are related to her. Things are a little less certain for other grandparents. For example, for a grandfather, there is always the possibility that another man has impregnated his own partner or, if he had a son, the partner of his son. Thus, the grandmother in this example has much more parental certainty than does the grandfather. Thus, kin selection theory would predict that maternal grandmothers, i.e., women who had daughters, should treat their grandchildren better than maternal grandfathers, i.e., men who had daughters, or paternal grandmothers, i.e., women who had sons. Euler and Witzel, 1996, tested this idea by asking a large number of people to recall how their grandparents treated them when they were children. As predicted, the maternal grandmothers were recalled as significantly more caring than maternal grandfathers or parental grandmothers. Maternal grandmothers are also willing to leave considerably more inheritance to their grandchildren than are paternal grandfathers. Harting, 1985. In the same vein, maternal aunts and uncles show more interest in their nephews and nieces than do paternal aunts and uncles. More generally, there is also some reason to believe that women's willingness to help may be more affected by kinship than men's. All of these findings support the notion that the more certain we are that someone is actually our relative, the more likely we are to help him or her. Other research on kin selection has focused on learning more about the thoughts and feelings that are responsible for these kin preferences and helping. This work is important because it addresses how the presumed genetic tendencies are translated into behaviors. Kochmeros and Kenny, 2001, had participants rate how close emotionally they felt to each of a number of relatives, and then asked their willingness to offer them help in life or death situations. Kochmeros and Kenny found that emotional closeness partially explained the effects of genetic relatedness on willingness to help. That is, they reported that people were more likely to help relatives than non-relatives because they felt closer to them. Nair and Lang, 2003, reported similar findings. However, Kruger, 2003, found that feelings such as empathic concern, sense of oneness with the target, could not explain greater helping of kin. Thus, the search for the psychological processes that make people more likely to help relatives continues. Comparisons of helping between fraternal and identical twins provide still further evidence for the kin selection theory of altruism. Siegel, 1993. Identical twins have exactly the same genetic makeup, whereas fraternal twins share 50% of their genes on the average, the same as with other siblings. Note that in terms of inclusive fitness, identical twins would benefit much more from being altruistic to one another than would fraternal twins. In one experimental study, Nancy Siegel, 1994, found greater cooperation between identical than between same-sex fraternal twins. The two kinds of twins were carefully matched on overall IQ levels and on IQ similarity within a pair. Nevertheless, 94% of the identical twins, but only 46% of the fraternal twins cooperated on a puzzle task. On a second task, in which twins worked once for their own benefit and once for their twins' benefit, identical twins worked significantly harder for their own twin than did fraternal twins. Identical twins are also more cooperative than fraternal twins on tasks in which participants make choices to compete for their personal gain or to trust the other person and cooperate for their mutual benefit. Siegel, 1991. Despite some unanswered questions about the specific mechanisms responsible for kin selection and more general criticisms of how well kin selection theory explains prosocial behavior in humans, Corporeal, 2001, this theory has gained wide acceptance among evolutionary psychologists, Buss, 2004. In addition, kin selection has been used to explain why people are more likely to help others who are more similar to them. See Chapter 3. People may unconsciously associate similarity with genetic closeness. Krebs, 1987. Of course, like all theories, there are limitations to the theory of kin selection. For example, it does not directly address the origins of prosocial actions that might occur among unrelated people and groups. Thus, we turn to other evolutionary processes to explain this more general altruistic orientation. Reciprocal altruism. In almost every culture that has been studied, researchers have identified something called the norm of reciprocity. Goldner, 1960. Within the prosocial context, the norm dictates that people should help others who have helped them. As we noted at the beginning of this chapter, cross-cultural similarities in behavior suggest that genetic influences may be involved. Robert Trivers, 1971, first used the term reciprocal altruism to refer to a genetic tendency for mutual helping. Reciprocal altruism easily explains cooperation when mutual benefits are simultaneously received by all participants. For example, emperor penguins conserve heat by huddling together. By huddling together, each penguin benefits by exposing less body area to the winter cold. Reciprocal altruism also explains why people will tend to help others who have previously helped them. In essence, it is the genetic version of the golden rule. Do good unto others under the assumption that, when they have the chance, they will reciprocate and do good unto you. It is much harder to explain why humans may have developed a tendency to help unrelated individuals when the helping does not immediately benefit the helper. That is, helping a non-relative creates certain risks for the helper. For example, if very few people are genetically predisposed to help unrelated individuals, those who do help will not be likely to meet others who carry this gene. Their prosocial actions may never be repaid. Rothstein and Pirati, 1988, proposed that easy forms of cooperation, such as the cooperative huddling of emperor penguins, may have evolved first and formed a basis for the development of more complex types of reciprocal helping across time. Because sharing, helping, and cooperation are behaviorally similar, they may be emotionally interconnected. Moore, 1984. In this way, genetic selection for sharing could lead to positive emotions being associated with all forms of helping, and the norm or ethic that favors them. Still, this does not explain why reciprocal altruism could be an evolutionarily successful strategy. That is, although we almost always benefit genetically from helping our kin to survive and reproduce, We would only benefit from helping strangers if they return the favor. If they fail to return it for any reason, there can be a large cost for our actions and little or no benefit. Thus, reciprocal altruism only makes sense if we are reasonably good at knowing in advance who will help us in return and who will not. In addition, we have to be pretty good at identifying both potential altruists and potential cheaters. In their social contract theory, Cosmides and Tooby, 1992, suggested that humans have developed just such skills. More specifically, Cosmides and Tooby argued that the basic problem is that in most instances when you help someone, some time goes by before the person has an opportunity to help you. Thus, most of the time you have to make correct judgments about what the person will do in the future. Induction. In order to do this, humans need 5 related skills or abilities: distinguishing among different people, remembering your past interactions with specific individuals, letting another person know what you want or need, understanding what that person wants or needs, and understanding the costs and benefits involved in a wide variety of human interactions. It is that last ability that is the object of the most interest and controversy. Tooby and Cosmides, 1992, did a series of experiments that appear to show that humans are actually quite good at solving problems, involve figuring out the costs and benefits of helping and who is a cheater and who is not. Also see Dunbar, 1999. That is, the human mind has evolved psychological mechanisms specifically designed to detect cheaters. Buss, 2004. Although this conclusion is accepted by many theorists, others, e.g. Chang and Holyak, 1989, question whether such sophisticated and specific thought processes could have developed as the result of evolutionary processes and suggest instead that they simply represent humans' ability to engage in complex forms of reasoning. Whatever the outcome of this debate, there is evidence of a neural basis for negative reactions to violations of social contracts. For example, Valerie Stone and her associates, Stone, Cosmides, Tooby, Kroll, and Knight, 2002, gave different kinds of mental reasoning problems, people with certain kinds of brain damage, and to people without such damage, and compared their performance on these problems. The two groups were equally able to understand problems that involved taking precautions before engaging in risky behaviors, but the brain-damaged individuals did much worse on problems that required understanding that the benefits they receive in an interaction should be proportional to the cost they pay, the notion of reciprocity. For reciprocal altruism to continue over time, there must also be a willingness to punish those who cheat and to find ways of socializing people such that they will voluntarily refrain from cheating. Evolutionary theorists have considered this matter. One of the things that would facilitate this willingness is the evolution of strong emotions that will motivate swift and severe punishments for cheating, which in turn will serve to ensure that cheaters do not prosper. According to Trivers, tendencies to detect and punish cheaters with moralistic aggression should tend to be selected for, as should guilt at failure to reciprocate. There is very good reason to believe that such tendencies exist in humans. De Curvain et al., 2004, examined the brain processes and mechanisms associated with the punishment of people who cheat in their interactions with others. Specifically, they scanned people's brains while the people punished someone who had not been cooperative in an economic exchange. De Curvain et al. Found increased activity in the region of the brain associated with experiencing personally rewarding activities. This suggests that people derive satisfaction from punishing cheaters. It is not possible to know as yet, however, whether this is an innate or a learned reaction. Group selection theory. The final evolutionary theory that has been used to explain altruism is group selection theory. Boehm, 2000, Sober and Wilson, 1998. This approach proposes that natural selection can operate at the group level, and groups with altruistic members are less likely to become extinct than are groups comprised entirely of selfish individuals. In other words, group-level selection argues that if two groups are in direct competition with one another, the group with a larger proportion of altruists, i.e., People willing to sacrifice themselves for the group will have a distinct advantage over a group comprised mainly of selfish individuals. The altruistic group would dominate the selfish group and derive a distinct reproductive advantage over them. Thus, at a population level, the number of phenotypic, and presumably genotypic, altruists would increase relative to selfish individuals. Although early versions of group selection theory placed it somewhat in opposition to individual-level selection theories, e.g. kin selection, more recent versions allow for selection to occur at both levels, so-called multi-level selection theories, McAndrew 2002. From the perspective of psychologists, the major problem with group selection theory is the difficulty one encounters when devising ways to test it. Biologists argue that the conditions that would make group selection likely to occur, e.g., a low level of reproductive competition within a group, are almost never found in nature. Williams, 1966. As far as we are aware, the major arguments in support of the group selection explanation are based on logic rather than empirical findings. This does not mean the explanation is wrong, but rather that it appears to have less support among psychologists and other behavioral scientists interested in evolutionary explanations of prosocial tendencies. Buss, 2003. As we noted earlier in this chapter, environmental factors interact with biological processes in determining complex human behavior. In this vein, we cannot talk about the evolution of altruism in the absence of some consideration of other biological processes, as well as the environmental and social influences that can foster this process. Fostering the evolution of altruism. The preceding material makes a reasonable argument that the growth and maintenance of altruistic genes may be of benefit to the survival of a species. However, it is also probably true that, in contrast to characteristics such as strength or intelligence that would likely provide survival advantages under any circumstances, altruism is more fragile and needs special circumstances if it is to be passed on across generations. What kinds of circumstances will best foster the development of innate altruistic tendencies? In general, conditions are needed that will increase the likelihood of mutual altruistic tendencies among individuals and decrease the likelihood of exploitation. There are 3 environmental or social factors that seem to facilitate the process: isolation, the ability to recognize other altruists, and the ability to detect cheating. Isolation. An altruistic gene will have a better chance to develop if groups are somewhat isolated from each other. This isolation increases the probability that altruists will eventually benefit from others' altruistic behavior. This factor is particularly relevant to human evolution. Early humans lived in rather small bands of related individuals, somewhat isolated from other groups. In addition, the requirements of the hunting and gathering lifestyle should have increased the survival value of cooperative and altruistic behaviors, given that people were mating within the group. Obviously, this theory cannot be tested in experiments using real people. However, there are alternative methods. For instance, computer programs can be written that simulate different evolutionary circumstances. The output from these simulation programs can tell us what conditions were most likely to produce altruistic tendencies in a species. Morgan, 1985, used such a computer simulation to study the conditions that might best foster the emergence of altruism among humans. According to Morgan's computer simulation, reciprocity fosters the development of an altruistic gene most strongly when groups of related members remain isolated from one another. Nevertheless, even when groups become large and split into more smaller groups, general reciprocity among members of these groups also facilitates the development of altruistic genes to some degree within the community. Thus, groups do not have to include only genetically related members and be segregated from other groups for reciprocal altruism to benefit members and enhance inclusive fitness. From an evolutionary perspective, altruistic behavior appears to have general, long-term benefits that offset the potential short-term costs to the individual. Indeed, these computer simulations of evolutionary processes also showed that in groups that included both altruists and non-altruists, individual altruists had lower inclusive fitness, that is, they left fewer descendants, than did non-altruists. However, the more altruists there were in the group, the better was the collective outcome for the group members as a whole. This provides evidence of the importance of physical and social isolation for the evolution of altruism, and also some support for group selection theory.